We have a lot to accomplish today. We want to welcome everybody today that is able to join us. Um, Today we're going to be talking about AI, and that is one of those things that you either love, you hate, or you just don't understand it. So we're hoping today that we by the end you maybe understand it a little more or hate it a little less. So we just have a few housekeeping things. Make sure that anytime you want, use the Q&A function, ask questions in the chat, unmute yourself, but we really want this to be interactive and encourage the conversation. Make sure that any other time your microphone is muted. If you do have any technical difficulties, let us know through the chat and we will make sure someone tries to assist you. And then at the next week sometime, you will be able to go on to the kshub.gov under the resource tab, click on the webinars, and you'll be able to rewatch what's talked about today. Uh, for the agenda, there we go. So we have some hub updates that Jason is going to talk to us about. And then we are going to turn it over to Allie to have some conversations about AI. And then she'll introduce our guest speaker that we have today. And then we will have time for Q&A after that. Just we'll talk about some different things that the hub is offering right now. And then we also would like to just encourage everybody to go ahead and put October 1st, same time, noon to 1, on your calendar because that's when our next webinar will be. I think, Jason, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, April. I just wanted to thank you for being one of the driving forces behind this webinar series, and thank your employer, Shawnee County, for supporting you in that endeavor. So thanks for kicking us off. First, I just wanted to make a big announcement. Our new executive director is on board, Sean Wessner, and I will hand it over to her to introduce herself and provide a brief welcome to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for your introduction, Jason. And I'm really, really happy to be here today. As Jason mentioned, I'm the new executive director for the Kansas Infrastructure Hub. I'm really excited to be learning and working alongside all of you. I'm originally from the state of Kansas and went and worked in the federal government for 20 years, both overseas and also in DC. And I'm just very, very pleased to be back home where all of my family and friends are. I'm really excited about today's presentation, particularly since, as all of us can attest to, AI is making significant impacts in our daily lives, whether that's personal or professional. I'm excited to learn more. I'm excited to hear from our speaker as well. I'm also really interested in learning from all of you what it is that you would like to focus on and how we can meet your needs. So moving forward, if there are areas, subject areas or topics of conversation that you're particularly interested in, we want to know it so that we can devise these peer-to-peer learnings based upon what your specific needs are. With that, I will end and say thanks for being here. And I look forward to meeting some of you soon. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Next, I'd like to introduce Matthew Hansen. He is a member of the Hub's technical assistance team and our grants subject matter expert. He's going to provide us a federal grants update.
Thanks, Jason and Sean. So really quickly, a lot is still happening at the federal level. Things are still moving very dynamically. First of all, I want to start with the news is not as bad as some would make it out to be. There has certainly been cuts to certain programs, terminations, etc. But the overall top line number has not changed significantly. as far as federal funding that's available, but it's certainly moved from certain programs to other programs. So, public broadcasting in the state has been hit hard. Farmers who participate in USAID and other foreign programs have been hit hard. But money has certainly moved to aerospace, aviation, defense, which is an opportunity for other communities in Kansas. So the important thing is be flexible, be able to pivot from funding streams that you might have relied on historically to new opportunities that you hadn't given much consideration. Uh, if you take away one thing from today's sort of update, stay in compliance. So many of you are still managing the ramp down of your ARPA, state and local fiscal recovery funds. For many of you, it's probably your first direct federal grant allocation. Critically important to stay in compliance with reporting and closeout and everything else. The current administration is very much looking for I gotchas, looking for reasons to terminate, and you don't want to give them those opportunities. So not only with ARPA, but any other federal direct or pass-through programs, make sure you're staying in compliance, because falling out of compliance could jeopardize your ability to go after future funding, which is what we're all trying to partner on here. This also includes things like SAM.gov registrations, other e-government registrations. Local governments have a lot of turnover, a lot of retirees. We've had some communities that have actually had their emails hacked. Really important for you to maintain SAM.gov, grants.gov, all of those e-government registrations, because they're foundational for you to apply for future programs. If anybody has any problems with any of that, please reach out to the hub. We have some one-pagers and cheat sheets that can help you navigate maintaining those e-government registrations. A lot of talk lately about rescissions. There was just a White House briefing document last week about rescissions. It's imperative that you know what the various rescissions are, what the potential impact is to your community, and how to navigate them. So we have real rescissions. These are rescissions that the legislature, the Congress has acted on, either terminating grant programs, pulling money back. So we've had one rescission bill so far. We have what are called pocket rescissions, where the administration just doesn't act on a grant program. So even though it's been appropriated, the money's with a federal agency, they have not released the notice of funding opportunity. They have not released the solicitation while they're working on additional rescission packages. And we're expecting one, maybe two more rescission packages as we negotiate the next year's federal budget. And then we have what are called process rescissions, and these are where the administration and federal agencies really are trying to stack the deck against folks from submitting compliant competitive applications. So we've seen a whole lot of programs, notices of funding opportunity, solicitations here recently that have been released with a 2-week application deadline. That is not accidental. That is not because we're getting towards the end of the federal fiscal year. That's very much on purpose to cut down on the number of applications they receive and potentially the number of eligible applications they receive. So the takeaway for you all is not to wait on seeing a solicitation, not to wait on seeing a notice of funding opportunity, but be developing those program details, the cost benefit analysis, all of the bones, all of the items that will go into a grant application in advance of a solicitation actually being issued. So you're not waiting and trying to struggle within that 2-week window. The other thing I would share is diversify your scenario plan, or diversify your grant portfolio. Certainly pivot to other funding streams, but also look for philanthropic and others. Kansas is very blessed to have some very active philanthropic organizations who are doing a great job of supporting infrastructure, backfilling some programmatic areas where the Trump administration has retreated from. So if you historically have just looked at state pass-through and federal funding, really take a look at philanthropic, not only nonprofit, but also corporate funding to diversify your grant portfolio. And then last item, scenario planning. Really, spend some time to understand what's at risk, what's happening at the federal level. We're looking at potentially a 5 to 7% cut in discretionary spending for the next federal budget. It'll mean a lot whether that 5 to 7% is cut from just one or two programs or if it's spread across multiple programs. Two of the programs that are very much being discussed now are the Community Development Block Grant and the Home Housing Grant. These are certainly grant programs that you should be aware of, and probably most of you use them for infrastructure, housing, and other types of initiatives. So don't let your guard down, stay compliant, keep your ear to the latest news. What happens with the next fiscal year budget, whether it's a continuing resolution or we actually get a budget, will be a big deal. And if you have any questions about programs or potential impacts to programs, please reach out to the hub. And with that, I will hand it back over.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the update. With that, I will hand it off to Allie Weems with the City of Topeka. She's our other valued partner in putting on this webinar series, and she's going to kick us off with our discussion topic of today.
Awesome, thank you. So we thought it would be helpful to kind of have a discussion about AI as a concept. I know it's been around a lot in ways we don't even recognize. We see it when we go onto Google and try searching things through their new features. We see it in our meeting note takers. It really is something that seems to be closing in on us pretty quickly. And if we either adapt or we reject it, and we're kind of stuck in the middle. So I wanted to kind of have an opportunity to have a discussion about where we stand with AI, and where we can use it productively, some of the risks involved. I think with any tool, they come with their risks and their benefits. So just having a candid discussion about that as grant writers and how we can leverage these appropriately. And one thing I also wanted to kind of keep in the back pocket here as we're walking through this presentation with our friend Wilf is some questions about our familiarity with AI. So if folks feel comfortable kind of explaining where they're at with AI in the comments, and I can definitely kick us off with my own personal experience just briefly, but I read the news. I see there's some concerns with environmental conflicts with AI and some of that development. So kind of thinking through some of the long-term impacts of the usage of AI. I'm very new to using AI myself. I leverage it in my day-to-day, whether I like it or not, because anytime I use Google, I seem to be using it on accident. But there are many other ways we can use AI in general that aren't as complex, that can address very quick issues such as revisions to documents or summaries and things of that nature. So just wanted to kind of throw these out there for folks to be thinking about while we walk through this. And next, I'm going to introduce our guest, Wilf Nixon. And he is a very seasoned veteran in relation to APWA, or American Public Works Association. That's actually where I had seen this presentation and met Wilf, was at the Salina APWA Spring Chapter Conference. I was really compelled by the information he had to share with us as a group, and I thought it was not only relevant to those within the public workspace, but just in general. And I thought he had really great tips I've never heard before as a practitioner, and thought that this would be a really great opportunity for us to discuss as a group ways we can use this, but also understand implications and kind of some of the history behind AI. And without further ado, I'm going to let Wilf get kicked off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ali. Really appreciate it. Thanks to you all for having me here today. Going to talk about using AI in the public works, infrastructure, general, you could call it civil engineering sphere, however we want to do that. That list of questions that Ali put up You know, how comfortable are you using it? How often have you used it? What are your concerns with it? Those are great questions. So we'll do our best to dig into that a little today. And if we can go on, Jason is going to help me by advancing the slides. Awesome. So what we're going to do today, what is AI? We'll talk about how it's already used in public works. And I'll give a caveat. Most of the way it's being used in public works to date are not the ways that most of us will use AI. Now, if that sounds a little complicated, I hope I will untangle it. I want to spend time today talking about best practices and in particular about what is called, I think somewhat excessively, prompt engineering. We'll get into that. We'll talk about how to make good prompts. Jason, could we move on? Okay. A great question to ask whenever it comes to any sort of new technology, and AI is just another new form of technology, is why bother? What does this new technology give us that we don't have today? And I think a key in this regard is thinking about our pain points. You had a briefing just now, a few minutes ago, about the challenges you all face in terms of the grant writing milieu, if you will. It's changing. So you are addressing that as a pain point. Your process is changing. Your regulations may be changing as well. That means it might be a good time to consider a new technology, but please remember this only makes sense if it's actually going to help you address those pain points. If it's not, don't do it just because it's new. Okay, new for the sake of it is not helpful to us. So next slide, please. Okay, let's dig into what AI is. And it's actually a huge ecosystem, if you will. It begins with the general big circle of artificial intelligence. That's using a computer to mimic, to some degree, human level intelligence. And it can do it in a whole bunch of different ways, and we will touch on some of those. A subset of that is machine learning. Machine learning is all about looking at vast quantities of data and pulling patterns out of that. You can then, using tools like neural networks, and we'll touch very briefly on that, get into the issue of deep learning. Deep learning, it's in particular good at finding patterns in unstructured data. And the world we live in is, in some degree, unstructured data. Okay, so deep learning is a very good way, computationally, of addressing the whole world that we live in. Okay, a subset of that is what is known as generative AI. And generative AI is where all the fuss has been in the last couple of years. Generative AI is things like ChatGPT or Copilot or Grok or any of the others that you may have used. And a subset of generative AI are those large language models. And they allow us to actually write a question, or it's now going to speak a question to our generative AI computer program, and then it will develop answers with us. Now, to make that happen, there is a subset shown there. And by the way, this diagram is taken from Esri. If you do any work at all with geographic information systems, you almost certainly know about Esri. They put this together as part of an APWA presentation, and it's very helpful, and we're using it with their permission. Natural language processing enables understanding and also generation of human language. That, by the way, is a non-trivial problem. Think just within the own language that we use, English, how often we misunderstand what each other says. and then think about some of the groups we interact with that are not our social group, and the misunderstandings get even greater. Now, you may not believe that, but if you've ever spoken to a teenager recently, yeah, there's a huge miscommunication gap, and natural language processing has to be able to get its arms around all of that. Another subset is computer vision. This is where computers interpret visual images. Now, we call them visual, but they might be natural light, they might be infrared, they might be gathered using LiDAR or a variety of other techniques. They are, however, in general, spatial information that is captured in a 2D format, and they then interpret it in some way. So that's all of artificial intelligence. What we're talking about today is primarily those large language models. So let's move to the next slide, please. I throw out this term, neural networks. It's part of machine learning and deep learning. And what we do is we put the input data, whatever it might be. It might be a spoken voice, it might be a photograph, it might be some words we've typed in. It goes into an input layer and then goes through a number of hidden layers, and we get an output from it. This has been done computationally for at least 2 decades, at least, if not longer. And a large part of this was putting together parametric modeling of a variety of systems where we weren't sure which were the most important parameters that we had to consider. So we threw them all into the mix and we let the computer grind its way through those and come out with answers, which we then trained. We used the answers, compared them to the real answer, and adjusted the model to make it better. At a very simplistic level, artificial intelligence is that, plus a whole lot more. So next slide, please. So the basics have been around for a while in some forms. Many asset management tools used by cities and counties these days use some form of AI in their image recognition. They go out, a vehicle drives down a street, takes a number of images, and those get interpreted to give you a score for a given stretch of street as to its infrastructure condition. Voice recognition, we all struggle with this. We have all had all sorts of interesting interactions with Siri and Alexa, and they don't always go well. But that is a form of AI. If you want to see how wrong it can do, there is a very amusing video of 2 Scotsmen in a voice-activated elevator, and you can look that up for yourselves. It is probably a little ripe in the language, but I think it makes the point. Another that we are all seeing more and more is automated driving. Many vehicles today have some sort of adaptive cruise control. That's where your car is looking at all the other vehicles on the road and making sure that the speed of your car is adjusted automatically to take into account those other vehicles. More and more of that is coming. You've probably heard about all the things where in some cities you can now get a driverless Uber or Lyft or Waymo, I think is the other company, to take you somewhere and help increase your blood pressure if you've never done it before. But the real explosion of interest that has come in this is these large language models, things like ChatGPT. So next slide, please. So this is a build, a couple of builds on here. So if you click twice, I think. The question is AI going to replace us? Now, long-term, all bets are off. I don't know. There is a search for what is going to be known as, or what is known as artificial general intelligence. Most AI systems today are very limited in what they do. They interpret images, or they look at what we type and give us back responses in relationship to what we type. You think about human intelligence, it's handling a whole lot of different inputs all at the same time. Artificial intelligence isn't there yet. People believe it may get there, and if you ask a bunch of the experts in this, you'll get answers ranging from 3 months to 3 centuries. One thing appears to be certain, that if we get artificial general intelligence, we will very rapidly have what is known as artificial superintelligence, where the machines are a whole lot smarter than us. And that's the point at which all bets are off. But in the meantime, no, it's not going to take our jobs. But I do think that any of us, regardless of what we do, need to be ready for the fact that workers who do use AI and multiply their impact by using AI are going to be more valued than workers who do not use AI. It's a tool. It's a very, very efficient tool if used correctly. So you think about, if you're a carpenter who does use a table saw, you're probably going to get more done than a carpenter who does not use a table saw. Get it done more quickly, more accurately, more effectively. Same thing with AI. It's a tool. That suggests it might be worth our while to learn how to use it. Now, there is one other thing. Next slide, please. As the cartoon indicates, it's always good to say please and thank you to the AI. I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords, and it's my hope that by being polite to them, I'll be one of the last ones they put into the Soylent Green processor. So politeness is a good habit with them. Doesn't do anything at the moment, but there might come a time when it does. Okay, next slide, please. All right, what about the risks associated with generative AI? And they're on this slide, which a good friend of mine, Aaron Stone, initially put together, and we used in a talk a couple of weeks ago in Chicago about the perceived and the real risks. And right down on the most perceived end are the job loss fears. I really don't know that we're going to see a lot of job loss. We will see some job change. There will be some disruption, and those are not good things to ponder, but it's not going to be, 50% of us are without a job because of AI. Intentional misuse, you may have heard a fair amount about deep fakes. That's certainly something that can be done. I'm not sure how much it is done. If any of you have seen the currently in cinemas movie The Roses, which is a wonderfully dark comedy, it gives an example of a deep fake, an AI-generated deep fake. You might get a chuckle out of that. There is a concern, and it is real, about algorithmic bias. And I believe that's inevitable at this point. We are dealing with systems that are trained by humans. And that means that material is going to be selected with inherent bias. Now, bias is everywhere. As an example, it doesn't matter where you get your news from, it is biased. And depending on your own personal point of view, you may think, well, no, it's not biased, and all that means is I agree with it. That's as it is. Bias is everywhere. We need to be as open as we can in addressing the output from these programs to remove the bias. Now, I'll come back to that because it underlines one of the things about using AI. there is a concern, and this is a real one, about data breaches. I assume when I use AI that the material I put into it is no longer protected. It's out there. Someone could somehow get hold of that. Now, that may be a good rule of thumb anyway, in terms of using it. Don't put sensitive information on there. So if you're dealing with, any personnel issues, don't put people's social security number on there. I'm sure you wouldn't, but a lot of this stuff is very obvious. Data breaches are a real concern. They can be overcome by getting what they call an enterprise system, which is in essence a form of AI that is internal within your firewall and does not go out. Those are more expensive, obviously, but that is a way of protecting things. And then finally, and Ali drew attention to this, and it's real, AI has an environmental impact. It is fairly computationally intensive, and that means to run AI, you need a lot of computers, a lot of energy, a lot of cooling water, a lot of things like that. So we're going to see that. I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but increasingly the companies that are involved with this are looking to solutions where they don't just build a computational center, they build a power supply for that computational center. There are some interesting things going on in that regard. As an example, about 30 miles north of us, there is a nuclear power plant that was retired, closed down about 8 years ago, and they are now in the process of firing it back up again. We're going to see, I suspect, a number of modular nuclear power plants being created, especially for this. So next slide, please. What are the best practices that we should use? First and foremost, and we'll go into more detail on this, is prompt refinement. Second, verify your output. You should check any output that comes from AI. The simplest or the first step in this is ask it for references whenever it gives you detailed information. You can do that right up front. You can also follow up on it and ask a follow-up question. Where did you get this information from? If it gives you a reference, a website, it's typically what you'll get. Check it. There have been a number of cases actually in the legal profession where lawyers have submitted AI-generated briefs that referred to completely non-existent case law. There have been other situations where judges have written opinions that referenced completely non-existent case law. So check. It's your output. That means if there are mistakes, it's your fault. Look out for bias, especially with AI-generated images. The images are getting a lot better, but they're not all the way there yet. Anytime you do an image, and we'll see an example of this, think about what it says, check it, okay? And then continuous learning. AI is changing very rapidly. In the last month, we've had the release, for example, of ChatGPT 5.0 or 5. And that's quite different from what went before. So be aware of those things. You've got to keep up on it. Unlike a table saw, it will be coming out with a newer, better version very, very regularly. Next slide, please. What about plagiarism with AI? It's our ethical responsibility to acknowledge work of others if it's not common knowledge. Okay, it's generally understood, for example, if you're talking about Newton's laws of motion, you don't need to reference Newton's Principia. Okay, it's taken for granted. But we should include references as appropriate. One thing that some people have done if they're developing stuff and they're not sure if they should reference someone on it. You can always ask your AI if what it thinks about referencing things. It is quite helpful in that regard. Doesn't mean you should do what it says, but it is a good idea to make sure you have referenced what you need to do. Next slide, please. Okay, how are we using it in public works? A few quick examples here. Over in Holland, in the Netherlands, the National Department of Transportation, their equivalent, runs their winter operations using AI. The AI takes in information about the weather forecast, and on the basis of that information and guidelines provided to it by the state organization, produces recommended actions for the maintenance operations folks to take. There are agencies that are using this to review plan submissions and check against some of the specifications. Some of the simpler ones are where you begin with checking and setbacks, so on and so forth. And then another example, people are using it to help draft ordinances. If your city council says we need an ordinance to deal with parking during snow emergencies, you can get some good first drafts from AI. I wouldn't call them the final document, but they might end up as being pretty close. Next slide, please. Other examples, we're seeing it more and more coming into controlling vehicles. So that can be dynamic routing. For example, if you're out doing garbage collection and it turns out a tree has fallen over blocking a certain street, well, AI systems can redirect the garbage pickup to take that into account. Deploying equipment, if you're mowing around guardrails, it is notoriously difficult to decide when to put down the cutters, when to lift them back up again. AI is pretty good at that sort of things. And then in work zones, you can have attenuator vehicles. The ones most exposed to the traffic no longer need to have a driver in them. They are tethered to vehicles in front of them, which saves lives, if not equipment, when someone inevitably drives into the work zone at far too high a rate of speed and hits the shadow vehicle. So next slide, please. Okay, those practices, again, don't believe it. Trust, but verify. Be careful on bias issues. It's just a tool, but it can be a useful tool. And then I want to spend the rest of our time here talking about the prompts. And the more you do this, the better you will be. It's called in some places prompt engineering. That's fine. What it is meant to do is allow us to craft our initial query to get the conversation with the AI begun in the best possible way. Now, that sounds rather anthropomorphic, and of course it is. Remember, your initial prompt is an initial prompt. It's a query. You will have to dig deeper. Take a high-level look at 5 prompt structures, and then a more detailed look at 2 of them. So next slide, please. Here we go, prompt structures. First one is for grant proposal writing. It's one called RASEF. We'll get into what all these mean. You can see the other things, tag. There's a craft, clear, and smart. Don't worry, we will talk about what those acronyms mean. So let's go to the next slide where we do exactly that. RASEF, you set down in your prompt the role, the action, the content, the examples, and the format you want for your output. Tag is a little simpler, task, action, and goal, and so on for all of the others. It's a useful way of getting your initial thoughts down on paper. Okay, so next slide, please. Let's try RASEF, okay? And RASEF was role, action, content, example, and format. Okay, so here's a prompt. And this is one I put into ChatGPT just a few days ago. You're a grant writing expert for public works projects, okay? That's your role, or that's the role we are asking AI to take on. Write a grant proposal for funding a new stormwater management system in a flood-prone urban area. This is kind of a little concerning. If it can do it well, that may put jobs at risk, rest assured. Okay, include a project summary, funding request, expected community impact, provide an example section on cost justification, and format the response as a structured proposal. Okay, let's see what we got. Next slide, please. Here's a response to this. You can see the project summary. I'm not going to read it to you, but that's really incredibly vanilla. All right. Then we've got the funding request and the expected community impact. There's nothing wrong here. It's just very generic. And the next one, please. The cost justification. So there's a breakdown here, 3.2 million and so on and so forth. And then the next one. I asked ChatGPT what could be improved. And it said, hey, this is way too generic. It's no use at all. You can't submit this. It might give us a good outline. So I said, okay, how do we make it better? Suggested follow-up actions. Refine it with specifics. And you can see what it says there. Particular town, citing actual flood history. Now, when you say that, you will probably have to put in a file that includes that flood history or storm event data from the last 5 years. If you were going to write a proposal on this, you would have that anyway. So you can give it additional information through those files to provide that backup resource. Let's look at the next slide. Ask for compliance with grant requirements. Every grant process has certain things you have to provide, and there are probably certain formats. So it's suggested here, let's rewrite the proposal to align with a particular FEMA grant program requirement. Add visuals or tables. It wants to add a budget table with itemized line items, so on. Incorporate community engagement. Ask it to give you a section detailing how community stakeholders were engaged during planning. And then finally, requesting multiple versions or refinements. So you could ask it to give you 3 versions of the community impact section as it sets forth there. So next slide, please. The more specific we get, the closer we are going to be to our output. Okay. I think a generic start, even though it was well organized in terms of the RASEF framework, is excellent as a brainstorming draft, but it's not submissible as a final copy, clearly. We want to get much more specific and so on and so forth. And you can see the pros and cons set forth here, and you'll understand these, I'm sure, much better than I. Now, ChatGPT produced this for me. It was an ongoing discussion between the AI and myself, talking about these things. How do we get these ideas across? It's not that that generic set of questions is no use. That could be something that, in essence, almost outlines what has to go into the proposal, so that you can then think about what sort of information do I need to add in. Now, it says here, most of you have more than 6 years of grant writing experience, which is awesome. You probably know what needs to go in anyway. But if somebody didn't, this would be a good way to get them thinking in those terms. And then as it gets more specific, you get into additional details that you are going to have to do anyway. And it just reminds you that all of that needs to get folded into your final form. I don't think it can produce a final form of the proposal for you. But what I think it can do is make sure you've got all the bases laid out and you have all the data in line, and it removes what for me was always a concern when I was writing proposals. What have I forgotten? And that's a useful one to have in there. We probably all of us have experience with having forgotten something. So this can be a good way to avoid that. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, we'll try the more simple one, task, action, goal. And it suggests it's most often useful if you're doing some sort of social media post. So here's an initial cut at this. We want a social media post for our Public Works Department to inform our residents about upcoming road repairs. We want the tone friendly and the message concise. That's okay, but we just went through, if you will, an exercise where it became very apparent that the more specific we can be, the better off we will be. So let's take a look at making this more specific. Okay, we're creating an engaging social media post, still for the Public Works Department, but we're specific. It's going to be on a Facebook page. Why does that matter? I use Facebook and LinkedIn a little. Others of you may be familiar with others like Instagram and so on and so forth. They all have their zeitgeist, their way of presenting information. If this is going to be for a Facebook page, let's make it for a Facebook page. Let's be specific, okay? We want to inform residents about upcoming road repairs and make sure they check for details. So we tell them where they're going to be. Liberty Street is going to be closed between these dates for an overlay between 4th and 6th Street. And then who should do what about this? Residents are going to have to access homes from the alleys. Other residents not living on those blocks should plan detours around the work area. And finally, keep the tone friendly and the message concise. Fine. Provide a phone number and email for contact with questions. Much more specific, still using that same format of TAG. And that's good. Let's see what we got from this. So here's our result. And I have to say, it would probably work quite well. You are going to get someone who doesn't like the greeting heads up neighbors. Okay, but that's okay. It's you know, that's pretty much in line with a sort of Facebook approach. Residents on these blocks, all others, questions, and then hashtags. I didn't ask for hashtags, but it has some good hashtags that may well be useful. Now, there is a drawback in this output here. And let's take just 20 seconds. And can you suggest, and if you can, put something in the chat, what's a failing here in this output? Whoops, not done yet. There we go. Nope. Want to stay on this page. A visual is one. Yeah. Actually, that's a really good idea, Jeff. It would not hurt at all to have a photograph of Liberty Street between 4th and 6th Street, right? A lot of people are much better at taking in data visually. Any other comments? That wasn't what I saw as the lack. If you go down to that paragraph where it says residents on these blocks, yeah, thank you, Angela. That male symbol is weird. Okay, we've got somebody in, a hard hat and an orange vest, fine. But why the male symbol? I have no clue. And it doesn't belong there. Now, it's easy enough to change that, but it does underline you have got to check the output on this. You absolutely have to. Okay, I don't think this is a major faux pas, but it certainly isn't pertinent and it's not relevant. And you may get people wondering, well, is it just men who need to use the alleys? What is this about? It is very much, thank you, Angela, that was an excellent word, bizarre. Okay, let's move on from here. Okay, what else can you ask? You can ask lots of questions. You can follow up, and very often when you get an output from any of the generative AI tools, it will suggest additional things you can do. And you can say yes, no, maybe. You can say, well, what about changing this? How about emphasizing that? Okay. You can also, and this is one thing that it took me a while to get comfortable with doing, but you can ask the LLM, generative AI, what else you should ask? What else should you consider? You can say, you know what? This is great. What else should I be thinking about in this regard? Because that can be a big help. Again, if you're not sure how best to ask, you can ask the AI to help you with structuring the prompt. And if, like me, you are somewhat concerned about our robot overlords, you can say please and thank you. So next slide, please, Jason. So that's the conclusion. I hope we're going to have some questions coming up here. The good news is there is a great new tool out there for us. It has, I think, excellent potential. In honesty, the way I use it at the moment is much more of researching what I want to create rather than doing the final creation of things. And I feel very comfortable doing it that way. Okay. Any of this, though, only has value if it addresses your specific issues or your specific pain points. And with that, I am going to be quiet and see what questions we have. Thank you all very much. Ali, do you want to handle the questions? Is that your job?
Yeah, thank you, Wilf. This is the second time I've seen this presentation, and every time I'm just very enthralled with the information and just new ways that we can leverage the technology. So thank you so much for your time and sharing with us today.
You're welcome.
And folks, I know we're running kind of short on time, but if there are any questions that you may have outside of this meeting, if you don't want to really claim any questions, I know sometimes I feel like I have a dumb question I don't want to attribute my name to. Feel free to offline email any one of us. We'll come up with a slide with all of our information so that if you have specific questions, feel free to say anything offline. But one thing I wanted to mention too, just getting started into AI, the one thing that I always kind of lean back on is I'm not a blank canvas type of person. I'm not a rough draft type of person. It's very daunting. And 2 points that Wilf had mentioned, it's a great starting point if you're just needing something on paper to start from. And with grant writing in particular, it's something to get you started and you're up against some pretty tight deadlines. We had been talking internally about some of the FEMA opportunities having only a couple of weeks to start working on a narrative. If you're not ready, that can really come up against some of your available time. And having a starting point that eventually you're going to have to own whatever information comes out of it, that's also very important to consider. Is this will be attributed to you, and to really review it and to make sure that you can stand by that information is really critical. So that is all I have, but definitely if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in chat. And like I'd mentioned, if feel more comfortable offline, we also accept comments after the fact. Okay, so I see Angela has a question. In your experience, GPT has been on very wrong in very subtle ways that are easy to miss. How do we ensure that the output is accurate if we're unable to review it knowledgeably?
Wow, that is a really great question, Angela. Thank you for that. I would say if it's not in a field where I know if it's right or wrong, I'm not using it personally. Or I'm talking to someone who does know if it's right or wrong and checking with them. You are quite right, though. It is very capable of coming up with some output that is, it looks good, but it may not be. So that's a real concern, and thank you for bringing that out. You know, yeah, you do have to check. You really do. And I also see Deb has got a question like, how differentiated would responses be for a slightly reworded prompt? Great question. I know some people go to great lengths where they will ask, they'll do a prompt in one model and then do a prompt in another model and compare the two outputs. That to me, I think you're going a little too far down the rabbit hole. And in essence, what you're trying to do is have the AI do the work for you. You have the skills in grant writing. AI is not replacing those skills, it's enhancing them for you. Okay, and could not agree more with what Ali said. It's getting away from that blank piece of paper. Okay, yes, if you just use the same prompt or similar prompts every time without really stressing those differences, yeah, it's going to look the same every time. A
And I'll
question,
just,
yeah,
oh, so sorry.
no, go ahead.
I'll throw out just three little tips I've kind of picked up on related to that. One thing AI struggles with a lot that I've noticed is word count. It does not do word count very well. And even if you say, hey, this is over 200 words and you try to correct it, it doesn't tend, at least the model I've used is not very good at that. And two other things, prepositional phrases, AI loves to use them in narratives. Try to cut that back when you're revising your narrative that it spits out. It's a dead giveaway. And M dashes. It loves to use M dashes. So anytime you can replace it with a comma, those are ways to help kind of soften the AI's harshness when it comes to narratives.
Yep. Totally agree. Excellent.
All right. And I know Kenda's probably wanting to jump ahead, so I'll kick it over to Jason to close us out.
Great. Well, thank you, Wilf. Thank you, Ali, for that great presentation. Just wanted to do a quick few reminders about the hub services that we offer. Our technical assistance by region. This is the map of our regions. It's on our website, but here's a list of our technical assistance providers. And I know the emails aren't on the screen here, but I did post a link to the PDF slides. And we will also email those out after the presentation once we get the video posted. But we have an excellent technical assistance team around the state. Also, April and Ali have made themselves available for peer connections. I know April mentioned that earlier. This is their email addresses. And then, of course, we have wonderful partners in the regional planning councils and economic development districts around the state that have grant professionals on staff that can be of assistance as well. With that, just a quick reminder that the Build Kansas Fund schedule for the remainder of the year, as always, our proposals for Build Kansas Fund match are due on the first Wednesday of the month. We do have, so that would be today for this next month. I know we have some Bridge Improvement Project or BIP applications that are out there and coming due on October 1st and November 1st. So get your applications in for those. Also, just wanted to remind everyone of our grant assistance program. Here we have grant writing or grant administration funds available for smaller communities or mid-sized communities of 10,000, cities of 10,000 or less, or counties of 50,000 or less, to provide that assistance. And then finally, was mentioned our next peer-to-peer webinar is scheduled for Wednesday, October 1st, again at noon. We do have our previous webinar recordings online on our website. And then very importantly, we would like for suggestions for topics for upcoming webinars. I posted our email address in the chat, and here it is as well, hub@ks.gov. We would love to hear more topics that we can address in future months. I will say for October, we are tentatively scheduled for data tools for writing infrastructure grants. Will be our next topic. So with that, I want to thank everyone for their time today, and we will conclude this webinar. Thank you, Wilf, and thank you all for attending.